and welcome to Into the Abyss podcast. I'm Todd Decker, and I'm here today with Jacob. Jacob, welcome.
Hi, thanks.
And we sort of know each other, but this is the first time I've seen your face and heard your voice talking to you. It's been mostly online correspondence with text, but it's great to have you on. And so you brought a few things to my attention a number of weeks ago. One was this book by Josef Pieper, a German writer, and his long essay, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. And so you got me to read it. So I read that and then a few other things that we'll talk about. But it's intrigued me, and I really enjoyed it. I actually read it again this morning. And I think that was my third time through, just to absorb all the information. But so why don't we start off? Would you mind giving kind of an overview of his thesis and what he says in the book?
Yeah. So I think this book, essay, whatever you want to call it, it seems surprisingly modern. It's from the early 50s, and so he talks about this tendency of the modern world to overemphasize labor, work, difficult things, to think that something is valuable precisely because it is hard and for no other reason. And the way that this can kind of turn humans into, I guess, means rather than ends in themselves. And he comes at this, he's Catholic, and so he comes at this from a very religious perspective. And his answer to this problem is really religion, and specifically Christian religion, religious celebrations, festivals, which he sees as kind of this the epitome of leisure, of doing things not because they are useful or because they attain some end that is rationally decided, but because they're good, because they're valuable in themselves. So I originally came to this essay because there's this tension that I've been trying to work out in my mind between the sorts of, I guess, Protestant work ethic. These we need to make sure that we actually get things done. The productivity culture of the world, which is appealing and has a lot of good points to it, but then also this sense that can't be all there is, or it shouldn't be all that there is.
Right. Yeah. Do you know? So first, on a personal note, I've found, I think one of the reasons I've read this so many times is because it struck a chord with me as well. It's something that I've been thinking about and concerned about, kind of on a personal level, but also on a social level of putting work in context and proportion, and not neglecting some of the other things that might be important to a full life. Do you know much about the impact of this book historically? It's the first time I'd heard of it, but I didn't know if it's had an impact on many circles.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe it has had a bigger impact among maybe people in like the Catholic philosophical tradition, mm-hmm. Or I get this sense that there's just this undercurrent that's been going on since even before this was written, of maybe the discontents of the hyper productive, efficiency driven culture that can thrive in certain areas. So I came across this from a blog run by one of these people, and I think this is one of the seminal texts of that subculture, maybe.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So there's a subculture that you were reading about this on.
I think of this as just kind of maybe a cluster of people who talk about these sorts of things. I don't know if they officially affiliate with each other or anything, but
Yeah. Well, one point that I really like that he brings up in this is this kind of um, means and ends idea. And interesting, when you brought that up, I thought of Kant. He does have some words about Kant in this, but they're not. He's more contrasting his view with Kant's, but there does seem to be something of alignment here, at least on the idea of people being ends in themselves and not means to something else. Um, and I also thought of in Aristotle's thought that there are things that uh, we do for the purpose of something else, and then there are these goods of the first type that they're goods in themselves. We don't just do them because they're for something else. And he repeats many times that, okay, this is stuff to do, but it's not for the sake of work. And a lot of times leisure um, could even be appropriated into the service of work, but that's not the same type of thing as this kind of pure leisure. So I thought of this idea of sharpening the saw, which I'm familiar with from Stephen R. Covey. Maybe applied in other areas as well, but which it was a fine idea. And I think it's Pieper doesn't even deny that leisure can conserve work as a secondary effect. But that would just be kind of that it happens to do that, right? But it shouldn't be the primary end. Like, okay, I'm gonna take this vacation so that I come back, I'll be all refreshed and I'll be able to, really perform well at work, or and it doesn't. I guess it doesn't have to be just employment, but just any type of any of the work tasks that we do for our sustenance, right? To just live and survive, which of course we have to do. But that it's not that he's talking about. It's not this sharpening of the saw as the purpose of it, because the purpose of it has to be something beyond that, right? And it's a very Catholic and religious based idea, and I do want to get into to what extent that can be abstracted from that particular domain. But one of the things that I think would have to be translated is there's kind of stepping out and looking at something either higher or deeper, depending on how you look at it. But that there's something beyond just the general workaday world.
Yeah, and I think maybe we'll get into this a little bit later with his other essay, The Philosophical Act.
Did you read that one?
Yes.
Oh, good. I didn't read that one 3 times, but but I did enjoy that one.
Yeah, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. One thing that I did want to say is that this kind of paradox that you can't do leisure for something else. You can't do it in order that. It's one of these things where you have to do it on its own terms for that act to actually qualify as the thing that it is.
Mm-hmm.
And this reminds me a little bit of something that he talks about a little bit earlier in this essay, as when he contrasts, I think, what is it, the ratio and the intellectus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
These two modes of knowing, perhaps, or the ratio is I'm assuming that that's approximately correct, but in pronunciation, but that it's the kind of standard discursive, sort of logical, deductive reasoning style of knowing things, and then the intellectus is the kind of knowing that you have just by directly perceiving or comprehending something without having to go through this sequence of rigorous deductive steps.
Right. Yeah, and this is where I was bringing up Kant earlier, because he contrasts. So the ratio would be Kant's idea, where there's definitely, so in Kant's thought, everything is from the subject, right? That we project our categories onto the world. So there's definitely a kind of action involved in anything. There's no complete passive reception, because, well, in Kant's reason for that being that if we were just just pure reception, it would be this hurricane of sensations that wouldn't make any sense, right? So he has this idea that we have to organize it in some way.
Yeah, and I think he brings this up in the context of saying that the term intellectual work is almost a contradiction in terms. That this would have been incomprehensible to people in the ancient world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in part because, first of all, they conceived of work as physical labor, first and foremost. And
right.
if you're sitting around philosophizing, you're not doing work in that sense.
Yeah.
But also this sense that that knowledge, and this is again maybe a very religious view, but that knowledge is something that is not necessarily obtained via labor, but it's something that's given. It's an
right.
aspect of grace.
Yeah.
Where the work that you do, the kind of exercise of the ratio that you engage in to obtain knowledge is maybe a condition, he says, but not a cause of that.
Right. Yeah. What do you think of that? Do you go along with that, or do you have any questions on it?
Yeah, I don't know if that is maybe the best way to theorize that, but I think there's something to it.
Yes. Yeah.
In the sense that, I mean, so I do a lot of intellectual work. I study math. I've just finished a PhD, and I've definitely had this sense of maybe guilt about not kind of rigorously applying myself to always, trying to disassemble everything and follow everything through logically and rigorously, step by step.
Mm-hmm.
Of just, if I tried hard enough, I would understand all of these things immediately.
Right.
Whereas I think the most productive and rewarding experiences that I've had in mathematics and in learning in general have been ones where, yes, I've done some of this sort of work, but there's a moment where it just kind of all fits together. And that moment I don't think is well described by, yes, I've gone through this list of deductive steps and I've understood each one, and therefore now I know the conclusion.
Yeah, there's something extra that impinges on that. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, there's something extra, and I think that the deductive steps, maybe this is something emergent, or that's the whole is greater than the sum of its parts sort of thing. But it's not the comprehension of the individual deductive steps that lets me say, yes, I understand this mathematical concept. I understand this structure. It's something that's less, that I can't articulate as easily.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that this gets at a little bit of, the concept of tacit knowledge versus explicit knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
In that, I can explicitly, I can write down a paper and prove and demonstrate to someone that something is true. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they will understand why or how I got there or what it means.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned this. So there's this, I guess, comparison that Philip Carey, who's a Christian philosopher, he does these lectures with the great courses on Christian theology. And when he was talking about the influence of Platonism on Christianity, he actually used the example of the Pythagorean theorem and apprehension of the Pythagorean theorem. So, he said, so if you're in a math class and somebody's explaining this, they write it on the chalkboard and you're kind of thinking through it, and then something clicks and you say, aha, now I see it. What is it that happens in that moment? That sounds kind of familiar to what you're talking about. There's a little extra push there that brings it into your mind and you comprehend it.
Yeah.
And it's a few things on that. It almost sounds like it's kind of rather than the leisure for work, it's work for leisure, or the ratio for the sake of intellectus, right? Because in order to get to that point, there's a lot of groundwork that you got to lay down but then something happens. And I think that's one of my favorite descriptions of something gracious, right? That there's this kind of inbreaking that ruptures the regular course of cause and effect. So in my discussion with Mike, when we were talking about the object-oriented ontology, so grace fitting into that, that's basically the idea that things happen that we don't necessarily follow the chain. But and related to something else you were talking about earlier about things, the virtue of things being difficult. I mean, I definitely there's a part of me that really buys into that. So, but it also relates to what you're talking about of things just starting to flow. So one of the hardest things I've ever done probably is an intellectual labor. I think that's a good way to call it. So I read the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew a couple of years ago, and I mean, I did have background in Hebrew, but just sitting down and starting to read it cover to cover was quite a task, and probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. And after that, I was like, I felt a definite sense of accomplishment, and it made me feel good about the virtue of doing hard things. And I still feel that way, but now a lot of it is there is this kind of just more of an immediacy. So like when I'm reading in the Hebrew Bible, maybe the work isn't as hard now, but there's a lot more depth there. So rather than just trying to understand the gloss of each word, there's more comprehension and more of the feel for what the text means. And so I'd say it's more in the at least transitioning into the intellectus mode is kind of what I'm going for there. But the groundwork had to be laid down beforehand. And it doesn't seem like so. Thinking of his terms, Pieper's terms throughout the book, I get that he's not necessarily saying everything has to be immediate or without any type of skill, because he kind of has this idea of a skill for leisure that can be lost, right?
Yeah, and even with respect to, I guess, like philosophy or other sorts of intellectual labor, I think he explicitly makes a caveat. He says, yes, that doesn't mean that you just kind of sit around and wait for inspiration to hit you. Like, you still have to do this rational discursive labor.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't confuse it with the thing that you're searching for.
Right. Which he can definitely say as a Christian and a Catholic, right? Because he definitely sees that there is something out there or in here, depending on how you want to think of it, that can break in and reveal things to people.
Yeah, and I think from a religious perspective, that definitely is easier to maybe theorize or conceptualize. I don't think that it necessarily fails if you're trying to approach it from a purely secular.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, one of the things that I noted while I was reading it today was he has kind of an alternate way of talking about this that almost gives his readers who maybe aren't religious a way of thinking about things. Let me pull up my notes here. Is it something? Oh, okay, yes. Like affirmation of the universe. That's what he calls it. So, let's see, I'm looking for two quotes here. Yeah. So one, he says, absolute affirmation of the universe cannot, strictly speaking, be based upon a voluntary resolve. And then he talks about the in order to and all that. But, okay. And then he also talks about, let's see, in the very last line of the essay, he says, the weariness of daily labor into an unending holiday, carried away out of the straightness of the workaday world into the heart of the universe. So that's seems like a way to translate that into other worldviews also.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way, as him trying to reach out at maybe an olive branch.
He may not have meant it that way, but
but yeah, I was I took it as maybe more of a, well, he's just being a little bit more metaphysically Catholic or
Sure.
something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think viewing it that way is maybe useful in trying to construct a version of this that works in a secular world too.
Yeah. Well, and Bertrand Russell, so in his essay, what was that one called again? Was it In Defense of Idleness?
Leisure, yeah, praise of idleness, yeah.
No, he uses idle in a different way, and of course they were in different languages, so I don't know how contradictory the terms would have been between the German and the English there. But it sounds like Russell's idleness is akin to Pieper's understanding of leisure, at least on the surface. Um, and to be honest, I only read that one through once, so, so I don't remember it in as much
Yeah,
detail. But do you feel comfortable giving kind of an overview of
yeah,
Russell's take on that?
I think, let's see. Yeah, so he's certainly much more kind of in this Marxist materialist sort of tradition.
Hmm.
There's and he's writing in, I think, 1930 here. So this is before Pieper's essay, before World War II, and he essentially argues that that even at this point, technology had advanced to the point where, you know, humans shouldn't need to work all day, every day, in order to support themselves in a
Hmm.
comfortable way. He claims that, you know, the experience of World War I demonstrated this because, you know, everyone was busy working in factories to build
Right.
raw material. You know, all the people who were you know in the army weren't working and making, you know, doing productive things, and everyone still got along fine. He says standard of living even increased during the war.
Hmm.
So why can't we just do that now?
Right.
And I think the biggest point of maybe agreement between him and Pieper is that again that we value labor too much for its own sake.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and both he and Pieper think that, you know, that this needs to be toned down. That, like, okay, we'll work, but not as an end in itself.
Yeah.
Not in order to, I think, as Russell says, okay, people argue, oh, we need to do hard labor because it keeps people busy, it keeps them from doing bad things.
Right. Yeah.
Or, you know, there's just this joy in showing that, you know, that you have the power to manipulate the earth and change your environment
Right.
as a man.
Yeah, there were some very funny lines in there. I wish I had collected some of them, but yeah, I got some chuckles out of some of Russell's lines in there.
Yeah. And so I think Russell thinks, you know, that there needs to be a sort of version of leisure that people can adopt
Hmm.
outside of, or that gives them something more meaningful outside of their work.
Sure, sure. But maybe not as much reaching to, or I guess showing the greatness of leisure or idleness as Pieper was.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to have this kind of almost, you know, maybe liturgical view of
Hmm.
leisure. He doesn't link it to religious celebrations.
Yeah, but yeah, kind of toning down the celebration of work as okay, it's not all that it's made out to be sometimes,
Yeah.
which is a good point as well. Um, yeah, it was interesting. He did have some criticisms of Marxism and communism certainly in there as well, um, and this idea that dialectical materialism was kind of the new master of the universe, and well, and that labor is very much a part of the the communist system, right? There's kind of a glorification of the laborer, um, and and they both. Pieper talks about the proletariat in his book, um, but he makes an interesting point that you know, the goal shouldn't be to make everyone proletariat. It's not that, or at least that's his view, right? I don't think I don't know if Pieper was communist or socialist or not. I mean, probably wasn't communist, but
Yeah, I think this was just in the air at the time.
yeah. So, but Pieper's point being that it's not a class thing, right? It's not, the problem isn't that there's aristocracy, bourgeoisie, and proletariat, these different classes in society. The problem with proletarianism itself is this this being fettered to the world of work. That it's kind of a totalizing force, in that everything in your life is encompassed by work, and that's the way Pieper understands the proletariat, and that it's the condition of a proletariat itself that needs to be addressed, rather than like a dictatorship of the proletariat, for instance, which is the reason I bring that up. That it's not that we just need to hand the reins over to the proletariat and then everything will be wonderful. And I think Russell had a sense that as well, that is a problem in communism.
Yeah, that I guess the messaging of the state, the propaganda, for lack of a better word, was the workers are so great and work is great, and so we're just going to make sure that we have work for everyone to do.
Right.
Continually, rather than asking, do we need to do this? Like, is this? Is this actually meaningful work, or is this is it something that we're doing because we can?
Yeah, and I'm thinking of the communist side of this, or response to this, is interesting to me. But I'm thinking of instances in the 20th century where there have been very negative, to say the least, treatments of intellect, right? So probably a classic example would be Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge killing people who had glasses, because if you have glasses, you must read and you must be intellectual, and that's not what we're about. We're for the farmers, the workers, and there was some of that going on in Mao's China as well. A little different than in the Soviet Union. I think the Soviet Union had more of a place for intellect, but yeah, they, at least with Mao and Pol Pot, they were not into this idea that, there's a greater intellectus, a role of transcending the material world to something higher. That was completely antithetical to their views. And it makes me wonder also, I actually just read a biography of Marx, so I probably should be able to talk about this better. But it makes me wonder if Marxism, at least as a school, is a little bit more, well, it is maybe the most consistent in its philosophical materialism. That if so, for example, Marx has this idea of superstructure, that religion, philosophy, the different intellectual disciplines maybe have their merit, but they're really superstructure. They're derived from economic forces. Economic forces are really what are the foundation of everything, to explain the processes of history. And so to my mind, that's definitely a downgrading of any philosophical exercise, or certainly anything religious. And that, I mean, I guess if that's the worldview, then that would be your take. You wouldn't really put much weight into these type of things that Pieper's trying to promote. All right. Let's see. Going to our notes here, just looking at the other. You mentioned something about, I guess in Latin it'd be the Acedia. And in Greek it'd be the same, Acedia. What is that? I haven't read up much on that, but
I haven't either. All I know about is what Pieper says.
Okay. And what did Pieper say on that?
So he says that this word Acedia, which is typically translated as something like sloth or idleness, is one of the 7 cardinal sins.
And it's seen negatively, right?
is seen negatively. And
Yeah.
his interpretation of this is that it is not the same thing as leisure, obviously. In fact, that it's actually the opposite of leisure.
Yeah, I was just looking on Wikipedia. It says of not caring or not being concerned with one's position or condition in the world. So yeah, that's definitely not what Pieper's going for.
Yeah, and I I think that might be a more descriptive uh, explanation from Wikipedia than anything that uh,
Yeah.
his. I think what he says is that it's something like failing to accept your position in the world
Hmm.
or in the universe, or failing to consent to to living as you were created to be, or
Hmm.
something like that's
Okay.
very kind of circumlocutory like that.
Right. Yeah.
And what struck me as odd is how you could ever think that idleness is the right way to translate that word.
Yeah.
And so I'm
Yeah.
wondering what other kind of facets or nuances of meaning that had in antiquity that would lead people to translate it that way.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, and unfortunately, I'm not prepared to really talk about that because I haven't read up on it. But I should, because that's a very interesting question. Yeah, because it seems like, um, yeah, it almost just seems like shallowness or something like that, like just lack of interest in anything beyond just the immediate. Um, like he uh, he has this example in the philosophical act. Actually, let me just read that because I really liked this line and got a kick out of it. Kind of related to it. Okay, so he's talking about like you're going about your daily business. This was after the war, and people were rebuilding society and the infrastructure of the world, which was no small task. So he says, just try to imagine that all of a sudden, among the myriad voices in the factories and on the market square, where we can get this, that, or the other, that all of a sudden, among those familiar voices and questions, another voice were to be raised, asking, why, after all, should there be such a thing as being? Why not just nothing? The age-old philosophical cry of wonder that Heidegger calls the basic metaphysical question. Is it really necessary to emphasize how incommensurable philosophical inquiry and the world of work are? Anyone who asks that question without warning in the company of people whose minds hinge on necessities and material success would most likely be regarded as crazy. It is, however, in extreme cases such as this that the whole extent of the contrast comes to light. And then it is clear that the question transcends the workaday world and leads beyond it. A properly philosophical question always pierces the dome that encloses the bourgeois workaday world. I just thought of that because this Akadiyya, if we're understanding it correctly, that this kind of lack of interest or shallowness is maybe a failure to ask those type of questions, which does seem different than idleness, right? It's not just that um, you're not doing anything, but also just kind of a lack of curiosity.
You're willing to live your life entirely within this dome of the
Mhm.
working world.
Yeah, I mean, kind of animalistic, right? That it's just about following instincts and uh, uh, what did they
Taking
say? Eat, sleep, reproduce cycle, right? Yeah, but that there's more to that. Okay, so definitely I'll bookmark that for further study because it looks like it's a classical and medieval concept that is right up my alley. So cool. Any, should we talk any more about the possible secularization of this type of thing? We talked a little bit about Russell, but Russell, it seems like he's not quite as interested in the, I guess, pushing the virtues of work so much as um, pushing down our esteem for work and labor. But how do you think, like, if somebody were to write the type of work that Pieper's done here, but for a different audience, without having to like convert everyone to Christianity, which maybe we want to do that, but if that weren't our immediate task, how do you think that would look?
Yeah. So I think a lot of the people who are in this, kind of locus of I guess, of people who are like I mentioned, this undercurrent of people who try to fight the broader cultural impulse to work harder, more productively, more efficiently all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of them tend to be into, I want to say, more Eastern religious traditions. A lot of them are very into mindfulness and meditation, Buddhist inspired sorts of
Okay. Yeah.
which is perhaps not strictly secular, but there's it's maybe more secularized in our modern environment than Christianity is.
Yeah, it's kind of like outside the religious frame, at least in a Western context. So it's relatively secular. Yeah. So that's how you see a lot of it portrayed in these type of discussions.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who talk about things like wu wei or non-doing,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably not quite what Pieper's getting at, but there are some affinities. In the sense of you act by not acting, by allowing
Mm-hmm.
yourself to act rather than causing yourself to act, perhaps.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, I'm thinking like, I was about to ask like, so, is this something that uh, we need to push in society for this, that, and the other? And then I think, oh wait, no, that's not the point. So, like, for the sake of a functioning, healthy republic or whatnot, where it may certainly have those ends, but for its own sake, it's something that's important as well. I mean, I'm trying to think of some of the. Well, I guess what would be the pushback on this? So I haven't seen like have people responded to Pieper directly, or I remember when what got a lot of this started was I was talking with Jack about the virtues of free time, and I think we had some differences on the way we were understanding what free time is exactly. Where Pieper's notion here is very much like a positive formulation of this. Like um, it's not just that you're free from work, but that it's basically an ability to do other things that are even higher in either an eternal scheme or an existential scheme. Which I think we were talking about Martin Hagland, and his ideas are a little bit different, but the way he described free time is that it's basically, it could be, in his view, free time could be work, but seen from the outside. But if it's something that's directed toward your own personal interests and goals, then that's still free time. But I don't know what's the downside to this.
Yeah, so I think maybe the strong argument, or one of the stronger arguments maybe against this, is that, well, we tried Pieper's view of how things should go for a millennium, and what finally got us out of that was this Protestant work ethic
Okay, yeah.
that led us to labor hard and value work for its own sake. And all of a sudden, we have all of this extra kind of abundance of material goods and prosperity, health, like all of these things that we didn't have before. And to kind of turn around and now complain that, well, it is maybe a little bit, biting the hand that fed you.
Sure.
And there's something to that, right?
Yeah.
That okay, you like these things, like this cultural evolution happened for a reason, and it had good effects as well.
Yeah. Although I guess not really prepared to defend this, but I was just thinking like a lot of the I guess scientific progress, at least in the theoretical sciences, didn't they come from aristocratic gentlemen and who weren't necessarily tied to labor or need to make a living to feed themselves. I mean, in certain cases, a lot of them, it seemed like it was just kind of their passion.
Yeah, I think this is something that that Russell kind of talks about, and he says, well, yeah, there's a few aristocrats who did that, but that's a terribly inefficient way to get it.
Right.
Yeah, progress. And more generally, I think those advancements were perhaps a prerequisite, but I don't know if they were a cause of these developments. I think
right.
That there's probably more to it than just, oh, we know that that F equals MA now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, somebody had to. I mean, so you get Carnot coming up with thermodynamics, but somebody's got to build a steam engine and build a factory and hire workers, and people have got to run those factories. And so there's definitely a lot that goes more into that once the theoretical work's been kind of fleshed out. Yeah, that's a good point. And yeah, I mean, obviously, and Pieper doesn't deny that work is necessary for survival, right? I mean, it's certainly the case, right? That we eat our bread by the sweat of our brow, right? So,
maybe the caricature of Pieper's view is that every once in a while you'll see someone online say that, oh well, peasants in the Middle Ages had a pretty good life. They worked kind of hard 4 months out of the year, and then the rest of the year they had lots of free time. They could just kind of hang out with their family. Right. and like, yes, but you're very selective in the aspects of the life of a medieval peasant.
Yes.
And similarly, like, yes, I think if I'm not sure. In fact, I'm certain that I would not choose to go back to quality of life of the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
But have even the ability to engage in the sort of leisure that Pieper advocates for, as much as I wanted.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in the abundance of the prosperity and material wealth that we have has enabled at least a possibility for greater leisure. So I do think, it's not an either or necessarily. And it seems like in Pieper's idea is that he just doesn't want to get the life of leisure crowded out, right? It's not that work needs to be done away with, but that it just shouldn't take over everything. And I don't even know if maybe that percentage gets less and less with time if we're able to automatize a lot of things. But I mean, probably we're able to do that more now than peasants would have been able to do back in the day. But there's kind of like this this creep of, or at least the way he sees it, there's this creep of the work mentality into the contemplative life. And another thing I was thinking is, this is getting back to the difference between, he calls it active leisure, right? In certain parts, in a positive way, like, so the difference between active leisure and just idleness, as he calls it. That I think one of the concerns could be that work and being involved in something is a good, right? And it seems to be conducive to well-being. I've seen this discussed a lot in positive psychology and in various formats, but that work is a good thing for people. And I think maybe that needs to be distinguished a little bit because there are different types of work, right? I think some of what gets wrapped up into work includes this notion of leisure also. That a lot of what we devote ourselves to is maybe not producing capital, or contributing to our sustenance, but it's definitely something that's very active and that we get flow from. And and also that we can gives a sense of meaning. That so I'm thinking of like institutions, whether they're religious institutions or just community institutions. I could see a lot of that working itself out as leisure as well. That it wouldn't necessarily, even if it is contribute, like if you're working in your local community to beautify it or make people closer to each other. I mean, if that's not directly, you're doing it because you have to survive, but it's something that gives you an uplifted state. That could be leisure as well.
Yeah, and maybe this, you say, or there's this sense that, okay, work is good. It's rewarding. It has positive effects on us. And I think one of the things that Pieper and others want to kind of say as a counterpoint to that is that, that some work is rewarding in that way, perhaps, but that it's easy to say, to go from work is rewarding to doing something that's difficult is therefore inherently rewarding, and you should do lots of difficult things.
Right.
And the more difficult, the better and more virtuous they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. And that's a very good point. Yeah. I mean, one of the things for my own well-being that's been kind of important is, I guess, not to expect too much of the necessary work. So like a little bit of a separation, like, so like, when I go about my daily work, whether it's for employment or just stuff that needs to be done around the house, I guess I manage expectations, right? That, what, this doesn't have to be my source of fulfillment. maybe some people do get it where the source of their sustenance and material well-being also happens to coincide with like their greatest interests in life. There's a little bit of a coincidence for me, but by and large, it's not, right? It's just what needs to be done. It's like, okay, I need to pay the bills, and that's kind of what I'm getting from this. But I would worry that if we were to endow too much expectation from that like, oh, this is where it's at. This is the whole of life. This is where we should be getting all of our fulfillment from. That we're setting ourselves up for disappointment and probably depression if we do that. And then also it seems like if this idea of just putting a lot of weight in things that are difficult for the sake of being difficult. Well, a few things. One is that could be exploitative, right? It's like, oh, well, that's for you. What you do, all this work that you're doing for me, I'm sure that benefits you too. You must get a lot of fulfillment from that. That'd be a kind of a cynical take on it, or just that it could become kind of addictive, right? The workaholism that you keep on expecting, like, oh, well, they say it's going to kick in at some point. This is really going to be fulfilling, but I haven't got it yet. But just one more hit might get it for me.
Yeah, and I think so. One of the things I think, going back to when we were talking about this previous episode where you were talking with Jack about free time, and I think later he talked about his sense that it's important to value people who do hard things. That it's important to resist entropy.
Okay, yeah. Was it you who called it the anti-entropy religion, or was that?
I think both of us would agree to that.
To that term, okay. We'll use that for now.
Yeah, and I think I've had in my mind this sort of dichotomy or tension or conflict between, I guess, the anti-entropists and maybe these I've called them in my head the intuitionists.
Okay.
But I think between the people who see the central difficulty, or the central maybe the central goal as maintaining civilization, making sure that the good things that we've built stick around, and that we build more new things and good things. And then others who see maybe the path to human fulfillment as coming from things that are outside of that.
Yeah.
Of this kind of building everything and making sure that we, that we work hard sort of sphere. Maybe what people would call this workaday dome.
Yeah.
That covers us.
I was thinking about the anti-entropy idea. So, I mean, just and this is taking the metaphor too far, but but thinking about the world as an open system, that we don't really have to do anything to resist entropy, right? Because we have this amazing energy source in our backyard called the sun that gives us lots of low entropy energy that I hope I'm saying that right, that enables for processes to occur that reduce entropy, at least for short periods of time on the cosmic scale. That the complexification of systems on the Earth doesn't require any direct effort or labor because of this entropy. Because of this, was that sorry?
Like almost all of this complexification happened without,
without anybody having to.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I mean, we could view that also, that this is God working, and that but the point being that it's not us, right? That it's something outside of us that's giving us all of this, and that kind of relates to the idea of Jesus. I was thinking about how consider the lilies of the field, the birds of the sky, all these things that are happening around us that we don't have to, or they don't have to do anything about it, right? Now, humans probably aren't quite in that at that level. At least we don't want to be. But there is struggle, right? But there doesn't have to be a director or somebody putting labor into that for those things to happen. And that's a very discrete and absolute way of putting it, right? Because we do till the soil and things. But even Jesus talks about how, like, when even if we think about this small part of our labor that we do to direct things, most of it is still outside of our control. So Jesus talks about this example of planting the seed. Well, okay, so that's labor, right? But after that, the person who plants the seed has no idea how it happens. And this was pre-botany, I guess. But even so, even today, we don't do much beyond. I mean, all those processes are internal. We give water, we give nutrients, and even if we get really scientific about it, still the sprouting of the seed is this own internal process that's happening from this process that developed by evolution before anybody was ever directing it. And kind of what I'm getting at with all this is that there's this grace, right? This source of low entropy is grace. That's one way to think of it anyway. But and so anyway, there's my very extended analogy of grace entering into the anti-entropy religion.
and maybe this is related to what Pieper talks about, and as he talks about festivals and celebrations, of this kind of that it's only when you're in this sort of given this grace-filled space of a religious festival, perhaps, where you can experience true wealth, this and superfluity of just things freely given, rather than measured out as you're calculating the optimal way to allocate everything and ensure that everyone's utility is maximized. This sense of wealth, or of, and I think that's possible because of the givenness of so much of our low entropy state.
Yeah. I keep on thinking about this essay by Hugh Nibley. And for people who don't know, Hugh Nibley, he's like a Latter-day Saint scholar, but talked a lot about, well, he got a lot into politics and social issues. But he has this essay called Work We Must, But the Lunch is Free. So this idea being that we shouldn't forget that our work, yeah, maybe it's necessary, but ultimately it all comes from God, right?
It's a condition, not a cause, I think, as Pieper said.
Oh, say that again. Sorry.
The condition, not a cause.
Ah, yeah. Okay, that's very interesting. I'll have to highlight that one. Yeah, that's good. There was one quote I wanted to read about that. Let me find where it was. Da, 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 da. Oh yeah, okay. And I think this is in the context of what was it you were calling it? The festivals and things. Okay, so he says, the world of work and of the worker is a poor, impoverished world, be it ever so rich in material goods, for on an exclusively utilitarian basis, on the basis, that is, of the world of work, genuine wealth which implies overflowing with superfluities into unnecessaries, is just not possible. That's actually like the same link. Were you reading that?
So that was one of the words that struck me.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. Basically, exactly what you were saying there. But I really liked that that line. It reminded me of this discussion I had a number of years ago with a friend about Aldous Huxley's novel Brave New World. Have you read that one?
No.
It's like a classic dystopia. Do you know the premise?
I more or less.
Okay, I'll give a brief overview. It's probably good anyway for people listening who may not be familiar with it. So it's kind of like this. It's a dystopian novel. It's kind of like 1984's maybe younger brother, and not quite as famous, and probably not as good as a book. But it has a very interesting idea of that this totalitarian regime that gives us everything we want. Right, that just indulges us in all our pleasures, or even manufactures us so that the things that we do are pleasurable, whether they're pleasurable to other people. So it's basically utility maximization, kind of, but in a hedonic sense, right? And that ends up being the issue, is that there's this guy who is kind of living outside of that world, who comes and visits. And he's just kind of appalled by, well, first he's amazed. And he says, oh, brave new world, this is all this technology and wonderful things that people have here. But then he starts to realize that there's a lack of depth to it all, and that there's a lack of anything higher. And he has a conversation at the end with, I think he's called the director or something. It's kind of like a very 1984 type of scenario where the curtain's pulled back and you see who's behind the scenes, who kind of knows what's going on and explains the evil plot. Except he thinks of himself as very good. He doesn't think of himself as evil at all, but he's talks about all these burdens that people had in the olden days, and he shows like the Bible and William James varieties of religious experience, and all these things that people concern themselves with and bother themselves over. And we've removed those burdens, right? We don't have to worry about those type of things anymore that really got people troubled. And what I was talking about with my friend is that this was the whole point being that this is a very shallow existence, right? It's impoverished. And I guess there are many ways to do that. In this case, I guess people weren't really working. They were just, it'd be more like the idleness, right? But Pieper warns against that as well. If even if work is taken away, our ability to have leisure could be diminished to the point that we wouldn't be able to enjoy it anymore. So both of those are problematic. That to have the superfluities, a rich life, we need to have this capacity for leisure to get more depth. Cool. Let's see. Anything else we need to go over?
There's probably a bunch of things. There's a lot in this essay.
Just wanted to make sure we get the top hits. Let's see. talked about Jesus, talked about the proletarian. Let's see. Oh, actually, yeah, I do want to talk about this. I was wondering about, um, if this is inegalitarian, and it kind of coincides with what Russell was talking about, right? Because Russell, he talks about how work tell me if I'm portraying this correctly. The work is kind of is this gospel of work that's pushed down on the lower classes to kind of keep them working and feel good about it. Then Pieper even acknowledges that in times past, there's been a portrayal from the aristocracy that there is a kind of gradation in humanity, that there are certain people who are meant to think and enjoy leisure, and then there are people who are meant to be servile. And Aristotle had a very strong sense of this that was like biological, so that slaves are slaves because of their physical makeup, right? And that if they weren't that way, they wouldn't be slaves. And I think we can obviously today look at that and question that heavily. But is that a necessary condition of this? Because I mean, not everyone maybe wants to have deep thoughts, right? So how do we? And that seems like a problem. I mean, I don't like inegalitarianism, but anyway, what do you think of that?
So yeah, I think Russell he tries to address this in his essay, and he I think his view is yes, like there shouldn't be anyone who doesn't have to work, but everyone should just work 15 hours a week maybe, and then
Right.
spend the rest of their time doing things that they find valuable. The example that comes to mind that he uses is folk dancing, and he says that even then, this has fallen out of fashion anywhere except the most rural areas. And so he's not saying like everyone needs to be participating in these highfalutin sort of fancy intellectual pursuits,
Right.
But there's lots of valuable cultural pursuits that don't require lots of you to be interested in these in deep metaphysical questions or anything that would still be valuable. And I think Pieper also agrees that I don't think that he thinks you have to philosophize to be participating in active leisure.
This is Pieper you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that's correct. Or that was the way I understood it as well. Yeah.
And I'm still not, entirely sure of what exactly he would point to as maybe the prototypical example of leisure. And maybe that's part of the point. Maybe it's more of this sort of attitude than any particular act. But going back to the religious festival idea, like everyone participated in a religious festival historically,
right? Yeah,
and you didn't have to be a priest or a monk or wealthy to celebrate and enjoy and be pointed to something beyond yourself.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, obviously, Pieper, he's a philosopher, and his other essay was The Philosophical Act. So he's definitely bringing in a lot of philosophical examples. And I relate to that because I really like philosophy. But I think you're right that it's not the spirit of the essay isn't really limited to that. And I was actually thinking something very similar. So that there are many ways to break out of just the life of sustenance, right? And that we don't have to see any of them as low grade. Well, maybe some, but but many. There are many ways that can be on equal footing, I think. So I mean, I think most people enjoy music. Most people enjoy entertainment, whether in television, movies, plays, sports, many different ways that people can break out of the regular cycle of things to get into a different frame. And I think that definitely has a lot of egalitarian potential. So yeah, that brings me back from my worry there. Resolved.
I think it's definitely possible to do it in an egalitarian way.
Yeah.
Historically, perhaps it has very much not been.
Right. Yes.
But I think the principle is not necessarily inegalitarian.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Yeah, and I don't know this well enough to say for sure. I mean, maybe some of the classical thinkers like Aristotle might have thought differently, but I think definitely that doesn't have to be the case. That everyone can enjoy these superfluities. That's going to be my favorite word. We'll just make that the tagline for this episode.
I like that word too.
Superfluities. I am definitely going to put that in the summary. Cool. All right. Let's see. I think that was the last major point that I wanted to get into. Let me look at yours. Just make sure we got everything.
I think we
yeah.
hit most of those. Yeah.
I think we're good. All right. Very cool. Well, now I'll go and read it for the fourth time, and I'll get even more of it. No, okay, maybe later. but I very much enjoyed the book, and so thank you for bringing it to my attention and giving me some interesting stuff to read and to think about. Like you, I feel like this is very pertinent to my personal life. For me to think about, okay, what am I striving for? Maybe striving is not the right word. But what am I after here, right? Darn it, I can't talk about anything now. Just kidding. All right. Well, cool. Well, thank you very much. Any last words?
I've said all my words.
All right. Oh, we didn't wear our leisure suits. I forgot about that. Okay. Well, that'll be in the follow-up. It'll be unrelated. We'll be talking about something different, but we'll be talking about like mathematics and stuff, but we'll wear our leisure suits. All right. Well, thank you very much. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye.